The Recreation Committee and the Recreation Department have made good progress reducing the health risks and insults to the environment associated with plastic turf by systematically substituting at the Lincoln Fields crumb rubber with a wood infill with a bioengineered product. Even so, concerns remain about the continued use of plastic turf. Kavitha and I are a biologist and a retired chemist, a mother and a grandmother who are not experts in field management by a long shot, but feel comfortable reading and interpreting technical papers. We are concerned by what we read, and we want to ensure a safe environment for our children to exercise and thrive. We believe more can be done in the selection of playing fields to protect our children and the environment from the cumulative impacts of playing on plastic. These considerations are particularly poignant as we contemplate applying plastic to relatively undisturbed land such as Harrington Fields. Deciding between grass and plastic turf involves a series of trade-offs. How much playtime can be achieved on each surface? What are the environmental impacts? What are the health risks associated with cumulative playtime? And what are the relative costs? Ultimately, the decision comes down to what is best for the community. Not all grass fields are created alike. And you just saw an example of really bad grass in the first slide where Ricky Papo's grandchildren are running around on a field in Arlington. That was really bad grass. But good grass, often referred to as organically managed natural grass fields, offers elevated playing times relative to conventionally managed grass fields. Two important characteristics of good grass fields are soil composition and drainage. And when building a new field, the opportunity exists to build in drainage. And we should do that in Lexington because most of our fields are wet and we have a lot of clay. And depending upon the soil conditions, when constructing a new field, there may be a need to add as much 8 inches of new soil. Healthy root growth is essential to rapid and durable grass growth. And to promote good root growth, 4 factors are optimized. The texture of the soil, that is the proportion of clay, silt, and sand, must be optimized. The chemistry of the soil, is it acidic? What are the nutrients? And organic matter, which is necessary to retain moisture and support microbes, as well as the biology of the soil. What microbes are available to generate nitrogen and to transport nutrients to the roots of the grass. There's science involved in both the construction of good grass fields and their maintenance. Maintenance is not necessarily routine. It needs to be individualized attention to determine the frequency of mowing, of aeration, of irrigation, of overseeding, even of the choice of seeds. There are now very rapidly growing grass strains. These maintenance techniques may not be consistent with the busy schedule of the Municipal Department of Public Works. So I can understand why there's a reluctance to consider sustainably managed natural grass. But I would recommend that the town seek the advice of a consultant, first in sustainable turf management, if the town is serious about creating good grass. Hopkins Field in Marblehead, Massachusetts, has been used for football, lacrosse, soccer, and physical ed classes, and routinely achieves about 1,800 or more hours of playing time per year. Similar results have been seen in Springfield, Massachusetts, and Martha's Vineyard. These results have been replicated across the country in fields in Maryland, Ohio, and California. Good grass works, but it takes work to achieve high playing times on grass. The strong root structure of good grass plays an important role in sustainability. Grass sequesters carbon. Plastic turf is a net positive emitter of carbon dioxide. And over the 10-year lifespan of a 2-year artificial turf, from making the material from fossil fuel to maintenance and ultimately disposal, it's estimated that 55 metric tons of carbon dioxide are emitted. And in contrast to the net carbon dioxide, which is absorbed by a comparably sized grass field of 17 metric tons over the same period. Grass cools through evaporative cooling. Plants take up water from the soil and release it through their leaves. The same principle is why trees cool the urban environment, but on a smaller scale. In contrast, plastic creates heat islands. Good grass fields absorb water. Plastic turf is impervious. Stormwater containing material from the turf runs off the field and can contaminate adjacent wetlands. Harrington Fields are on the headwaters of the Mystic River watershed, and the Mystic River Watershed Association is on record as opposed to the installation of plastic turf in their region. As a related matter, the permitting of synthetic fields adjacent to wetlands is the subject of a webinar by the Massachusetts Association of Conservation Commissioners this Wednesday at noon. Plastics are made from fossil fuel. If plastics were a country, it would be the 5th largest emitter of carbon dioxide. We might attain our 2050 greenhouse gas goal emissions for in the building and transportation sectors, but by 2050, emissions associated with plastic production will have quadrupled and will have offset a significant portion of the gains we have made by our decarbonization efforts. Plastics are polymers, long chains of repeating molecules. I like to think of a polymer like a train, where the train cars are the individual molecules. The difference is that you can uncouple the train cars. You can pull them apart into individual cars which can go off in their own directions. That's not the case with the backbone of a polymer. The individual molecules in the backbone of a plastic polymer are chemically bonded, and it actually takes more energy to pull them apart than it does to make them. So that by adding energy, you don't pull them apart into their constituent little molecules, you break them up into large chunks. Plastics are also, in addition to the polymers, plastics are made by adding to the polymer about 50% by weight or more of various chemicals. These chemical additives are flame retardants, coloring agents, plasticizers, antioxidants, heat stabilizers, and most of them are toxic. These chemicals, many of which are known, are bonded to the polymer backbone, are not bonded to the polymer backbone. Consequently, as the plastic is exposed to heat, light, and water, these polymers degrade into microplastics, which accumulate in the environment, in our waterways, in our oceans, and ultimately in us, releasing toxic material along their path. Plastics themselves become forever chemicals. Less than 5% of plastics worldwide are recycled. Plastic turf can only safely be disposed if it's deposited in a well-lined, monitored landfill. Plastic turf can't be recycled. Chemical recycling, touted by industries, is a false promise. Chemical recycling is heating up plastic, it's just a way of combusting it, burning the plastic carpet, and perhaps generating some very expensive synthetic fuel. Furthermore, these chemical recycling plants are regulated as manufacturing facilities, not as waste handling facilities. The emission controls from chemical recycling facilities are far less stringent than those, say, of the incinerator in Saugus. Most of these so-called recycling facilities are placed in low-income communities and communities of color which do not have the resources to protect themselves against the toxic effluents. These are not viable processes. It is not a solution that we should be promoting. Reuse is not a viable option either, because the carpet will continue to leach toxins into the groundwater and jeopardize the health of those downhill from this source. Lexington is indeed a good steward of the environment, and we would not allow the plastic carpet to be rolled up and dumped in a wetland, as has happened in other places in Massachusetts. But by donating our spent carpet to some other community or institution, we are leaving the responsibility of managing our waste to somebody else. We are abdicating our responsibility for good stewardship. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Kavitha, who's going to talk about health impacts and take a look at costs.
Thank you, Jean, and thank you everyone for being here. So I'll talk about the health impacts and the life cycle cost of these two surface materials. Artificial turf can be a source of heat stress, a heat island, while natural grass provides a safer and cooler playing surface. There are numerous studies over the last couple of decades that have been done that show that natural grass is much cooler than artificial turf. And artificial turf can measure between 125 to 200 degrees Fahrenheit on a hot day. And this is taking into account the fact that the engineered rock fill or the engineered wooden fill that Jean talked about that we have in Lincoln Turf. The company that makes them claims that it can reduce turf temperature by 20 to 40 degrees depending on whether it's dry or wet. Even so, you have substantial differences in temperature between natural grass and artificial turf. And you know, it can be challenging to schedule sports during these hot periods, and people might avoid the playground or the field during this time. Thinking about the chemical impacts of these, one example is PFAS chemicals. PFAS, as many of you might know, refer to thousands of forever chemicals, as they are dubbed, and they are added in many commercial products. They're highly persistent and they don't degrade. A lot of research is emerging that shows that PFAS can have significant negative health impacts, as is shown by this visual here, and ranges from metabolic disorders, developmental disorders, and even specific types of cancers. PFAS has been added in the process of manufacturing artificial turfs in many cases. It's detected in natural infills, in the other components of the turf, including the fibers, the backing, and/or the shock pads, at various levels, from parts per trillion to parts per million levels. And there is a nice compilation put together by the Lowell Center for Sustainable Production at UMass Lowell that has put together a list of dozen or so academic, municipal, and nonprofit studies that have undertaken this effort. Now, there's a lot that we don't know about PFAS. Research is still ongoing about how much PFAS humans can actually tolerate in their lifetime. But we do know that PFAS exposures accumulate over life. Every exposure that we have is going to add to our risk. So clearly, this has greater consequences for young children who bear the body burden for the rest of their life. And we have to keep in mind that small exposures might be relevant. In summary, if we have healthier alternatives, I think we must consider how we can avoid a potential exposure to PFAS in artificial turf. As Jean touched upon, microplastics are another category of chemicals we should be thinking about. These are shed from artificial turf fibers, as shown by several studies, including the one that's outlined here, and they can be inhaled, ingested, or leach into the water. Microplastics have been detected in these turf fibers, and again, their exposures, like PFAS, accumulate over life. Research is emerging regarding the dose and health effects of microplastics, but there's potential impact from early studies that show impact on inflammation, metabolic disorders, respiratory issues, immune disruption, and risk to cardiovascular events. In fact, just this week, there were 2 studies published in very reputed journals that showed from 2 different groups that the amount of microplastics in our body, including our brains, which is a significant matter, has been increasing over the last few decades, and that they are now detected in multiple organs in the human system. So again, if we can find ways to avoid this, we must consider it. Finally, one of the things I'd like to talk about is the life cycle cost of grass field versus artificial turf. These are estimates. As Jean mentioned, we're not experts, but we've kind of tried to use the data that we could access in order to come up with these estimates. So let me first go over the assumptions. This is a busy slide, so let me try to walk you through it. What are the assumptions we made? We started with cost estimates based on consultant Weston and Sampson, who put together a report for the town of Lexington in 2022 about artificial turf and grass fields, looked at their cost used that, plus the cost of Lincoln Fields, we have some experience from that, and compared those to cost estimates that were put together in Arlington from a turf committee report in 2024. A number of these estimates really triangulated well and were correlated. And other assumptions that we made include that artificial turf needs to be replaced in 10 years, so in year 10. And we assumed that the disposal cost of artificial turf are factored into the recarpeting cost at that point. We also assume that well-managed grass fields have an estimated longevity of about 25 years. And then in this table, we do not show general site prep, earthwork, and lighting costs, because we're assuming that they're similar regardless of the surface that's used, and we're really trying to compare the relative costs of one versus the other. Finally, we conservatively assumed, relative to the Weston and Sampson report, that natural and well-managed grass fields, as Jean was mentioning, would really be a notably more expensive proposition compared to the typical grass field. So instead of assuming $28,000 per year per field, we assumed $50,000 per year per field, based on some other literature and webinars that we found. So, and we also factored in a 7% inflation over 10 years as a metric to account for cost increase, since some of these reports have come out. So if we look at this table with these assumptions in mind, we see that the total initial cost of grass fields versus the synthetic fields, we're talking about 2 grass fields versus 2 synthetic fields, is shown in the table here. Note that the Massachusetts CPA Act does not fund synthetic fields, so those would not be covered by, those would not be CPA eligible. And then if we add an annual maintenance cost for grass fields of $50,000 per year per field, so that's $100,000 for 2 fields, versus the lower cost of maintenance for the artificial turf, look at it over 10 years and look at the totals, the numbers are quite notable in that it appears that our grass fields may cost 2 to 2.5 times lesser than artificial turf over the span of the life cycle of an artificial turf, that is 10 years. And this is something that we should really keep in mind as well, because the economics of this is also part of the equation. In a busy town like ours, where there are competing demands on the budget, this is another factor that goes into the equation of choice of surface. I'd like to leave you with this slide and with a couple of concluding thoughts. I want to recall the town meeting resolution from 2013, which is to consider the impacts of climate change on all decisions that the town makes. This was an important resolution that really championed Lexington to become a leader in sustainable initiatives. Since then, Lexington has built 2 new net zero schools. It has become one of 10 pilot communities in Massachusetts that has adopted fossil-free building construction, and several other leading initiatives. And I think that this is our opportunity to use those same principles in thinking about what the surface material is for the fields that are being proposed. I like to think that there are no perfect solutions in life, only trade-offs. And I hope that we've provided you with a sense of what the trade-offs are in terms of thinking about playability, sustainability, health, and cost. I want to also note that given all of these trade-offs, there are other towns and cities who have either paused or passed moratoriums on building artificial turf, such as Boston and Wayland. And this is our moment to make an important decision. So I hope that this gave you some useful information towards thinking about this, and thank you for your attention. Thank you.
Kavita, and thank you, Jean. And I now want to introduce Melissa and Christian to talk to what they see as the advantages of synthetic fields and what their plans are. And I just want to note that LexMedia is now here. Welcome. So with that, we have
I'm generally pretty loud, so maybe I'll
no.
go
You
with.
use
So LexMedia.
LexMedia. You gotta use it for LexMedia.
Okay. Thank you. My name is Christian Boutwell. I'm a vice chair of the Recreation Committee. I'll apologize because I don't think I'm going to offer much of a debate. I would say I agree with, essentially everything in there. Maybe I'd quibble about a couple of facts and figures here and there, but I love grass fields. I think we have something around 40 total fields in Lexington between baseball, softball, diamonds, and rectangle fields. We have 4 turf fields. So the vast majority of our fields are grass. We replace the grass fields with grass. We re-engineer the fields. We add soil and amend them so they generate nice grass fields. So I'm not an opponent of grass, and I'm not a proponent of turf. What I strive to do on the committee and in concert with the Recreation and Community Services Department is to balance all the factors and try and come up with something that works best for the community. To date, that has included having some turf fields in Lexington. Having some turf fields in Lexington basically offsets the amount of load that we have to put on grass fields and allows those fields to stay in better condition for longer amounts of time. So the turf fields serve a valuable purpose because they can absorb far more playing than grass fields can, even when they're well managed, like our Department of Public Works does a great job of managing our fields. But here in New England, the conditions are tough. There's just a lot of days we can't put players on fields. And as was mentioned, our demand in Lexington is insatiable for fields. We cannot generate enough time and hours on fields to satisfy the demand between our youth sports, active youth sports programs, new sports emerging and developing in town, as well as a very robust high school athletics program. So between all of that, we're seeking to do the best we can, as was mentioned, to balance the compromises between different surfaces and provide as much playing time as we can for town. Before I hand it over to Melissa, we've made no decision on the Harrington Fields. As was stated at town meeting, we requested dollars for a design process, which includes community engagement like this. We will also hold our own community, open to the public, community-wide meetings to assess what the community feels is appropriate for that site. And then at the end of the day, we'll balance all of those often competing desires and put forward what we think is the best compromise solution for Lexington. That may be grass, that may be turf. I'm not going to say yet because we haven't heard all of the information from the community.
Thank you, Christian. Thank you for putting that together too. Some of the notes I had were already in there, so we won't have to repeat. I would just like to walk through the process of how that community engagement does take place. And so the fields at Harrington specifically, if that's what we're talking about today, those proposed plans came out of the field study that was referenced, and that was proposed as a project should Harrington central office come down. The project itself has been moved up in the timeline in terms of capital plans once the high school project was accepted into the MSBA. So we wanted to complement timeline. So that's why you'll see that these fields are being requested differently than maybe being introduced in the 5-year plan and then work its way up through. So the typical request is when we have a proposal is to ask for the most and then we go through the project. So the 6.1, I think, initial request for Harrington was if we were going to do everything, if it was going to be synthetic, athletic lights, everything we wanted. So that way, once we get through the community process, we have what we need, and if we don't need it all, then we don't spend it and we give it back to the town depending on the funding source. So in this case, everything was sped up, so we requested the design funds at special town meeting this past fall. We have begun some of our internal stakeholder meetings with our staff, engineering, the high school group, to make sure we're all on the same page about the timeline. And going through the funding requests for annual town meeting this spring, the conflicts for competing funds was very evident. Of the $6.1 million, $2 million of that was being requested in the general fund for the portions of the project that could not be funded through CPA funding. The rest of that was 4.1 was in community preservation. So the conflicts for funding are real, and so in an effort to compromise and be able to maintain our current infrastructure and not walk away from 2 end-of-life projects that were already being requested from community preservation, the Recreation Committee decided to lessen their request. And what we'll be doing is requesting the full design and construction documents this annual town meeting for Harrington, and returning to town meeting next spring for what the full design and construction requests are for. At that time, we'll know for sure if we're requesting natural grass, synthetic, hybrid, or, you know, if the central office building comes down. We don't know that yet either. So there's a lot of things that are going to come into play, almost like a domino effect. In terms of the community outreach, we work with all of our permit holders, our stakeholders, which are, our largest one is the athletic program and middle school program through the public schools. We then have LUSC, which is our United Soccer Club, lacrosse, we have 2 cricket leagues, we have Little League and softball, we have adult leagues that are on the fields, and I think that we could see at Center Rec, Center 1 and 2, and then the overlay rectangle fields, we are very successful with natural grass and lights, and mostly because they're diamonds versus being rectangle fields and the use that they take. Unfortunately, Dave Pinsino isn't here today to join us. He is at a conference out of state, but in talking with him, he said that the synthetic fields allow us to maintain the football field in the way that we do, because otherwise, before Lincoln was created with synthetic turf, that football field was being used for lacrosse and soccer, and it was a very different playing environment. One of the things that we struggle with is the fields now are used almost year-round, and they're used by multiple uses. 20, 40, 30 years ago, fields were built for single use. They were used in one season, and then they would sit and they would rest. Our fields have no resting time at all, other than when we take them offline to reconstruct them and resod them or add irrigation and drainage. So a natural grass field is typically, if we maintained it at that high level, we would have to resod it probably every 2 to 3 years. Rather, it's not a 25-year life cycle in terms of just doing daily maintenance. So we meet with our internal permit holders, we have our public meetings, we do community engagement, public meetings with the entire town, we get everyone's feedback. And in 2022, when the Lincoln One fields came online to be requested, the Recreation Committee spearheaded a working group. And the working group is represented with staff from, and committee members and board members from Recreation, the Board of Health and Health Department, Conservation, Sustainability staff and representatives, and who am I missing? DPW. And Recreation. And so from 2022, I would say, and we just met last week, we meet, I would say, probably 12 to 20 times each year to review. For a while there, it was every other Friday, at Friday morning, and we reviewed the specifications before they went out. And the town actually now has a supplemental requirement that we put into our bid documents that asks the contractors to provide us all of the materials, their testing, what levels they are at. I will say all of our synthetic fields meet and go beyond what the Massachusetts standards are as of right now. Unfortunately, the data and the state regulations have not caught up, so we're collecting information, but we don't have anything to compare it to as of right now. But in terms of going out to bid, we know what's in our turf and we know what we're getting. We have a chain of custody for when that does leave Lexington. So all of that information is available. So then once we get all the information back from the working group, the community engagement, we then work with our design team who will put together what the stakeholders in the community has asked for. And so in this case, it will include a full review of if we did natural grass, hybrid or synthetic, and what that would give us. It'll give us the cost, it'll give us the playability, the number of hours, it'll give us the type of field it will be. So I feel very confident in our process that we will be able to bring forward what the community wants. We have to remember that our stakeholders who are asking for the synthetic are those leading our youth and adult programs. So they're very aware of the fields and who's playing on them. I would like to recognize the heat factor, and the new organic fill has definitely impacted the heat. We couldn't measure it as well as we wanted to last year because the field at Lincoln 1 came online in November, so it was a little more difficult. But last year we did test the fields, and we tested the grass fields as well. And there were a handful of days, if you can recall how hot it was last summer on this cold day, that we actually closed all fields because the grass fields were above the recommended level as well. So when we do that assessment, we do that for all of our fields, not just those that are synthetic. So we are open to suggestions. We know the technology is changing all the time in terms of recycling, repurposing, organic infill. So we're monitoring that, and that's why this working group has been so valuable, because we have professionals and residents that are in the health, sustainability, conservation, public works, and recreation to hit all of those items in terms of cost, playability, health and safety, and sustainability. So we feel really good about that, and more to come, but I think we're open for questions at this point, if that's what you'd like to do, Margaret?
Yes.
Okay. Unless, Christian, you have anything else to add?
That's great.
Okay,
Is that on?
I just put it back, yeah.
Okay. Wendy, could you
Sure.
take this out to people so that people ask questions? Yes, it's 10 after 10, so I would say we have time for some questions, and I see we have one here. And please identify yourself because some of the people in the audience may not know who you are.
Thank you, Margaret. So my name is Cindy Ahrens. I'm the chair of the Sustainable Lexington Committee. I am on the working group that Melissa talked about. And I didn't actually have a question, but I wanted to acknowledge that those of us from the sustainability.
Oh, that's my fault.
Yes, great. I just want to acknowledge, I'm very grateful for us being able to work together as a working group, and say that these are difficult discussions that we're having. We are really trying to push and really get true data and not just data that manufacturers are willing to give us. It's very, very difficult, and we're pushing really hard. The working group is really, I think, in a very respectful way. I respect all of the work that we're doing. This is hard work to really try and get the data that we want, that we need to make good decisions, not just for Lincoln, but going forward in a number of areas. Thanks.
Yeah, you mean for Harrington, right?
Well, we're working, we haven't, the working group hasn't talked about Harrington at all.
Okay.
The working group has only been focused on Lincoln at this point.
I thought Lincoln, they've redone those fields, or some of them, haven't they?
Yes, so they've redone, I don't wanna speak for Melissa, but they have.
I mean, I drive by and I see them working on it.
Yeah, so in the course of working through the renovation projects at Lincoln Field, the working group has been contributing to trying to advance what we're doing there and take advantage of the latest thinking and latest testing and information gatherings.
Thank you.
Thanks. Ricky Papo, Chair of the Lexington Climate Action Network, but I'm here on my own. I was a little confused, Melissa, about the timing you're saying now in terms of what's coming to town meeting. in the spring versus a special town meeting in the fall. Can you go over that again?
Sure, yep.
Sure, I'm sorry if I ran over that too quickly. So based on the funding that's available this year and the competing interests for the same dollars, the annual town meeting will be coming forward requesting the 2 million that's still in the general fund for the Harrington project and the 1.49,
5 or 9.
I can't believe those numbers change so many times, Jean, in CPC. And so what the plan currently is that the $2 million would remain there, because if the project that does yield that a synthetic surface is what we bring forward. The CPC money will allow us to go from schematic design, which we're in now, that was funded in the fall, and then move into full design and construction documents so that we have everything ready next spring at town meeting to request the funding that we need for whatever project does end up being requested, and then we can begin to build as soon as we can in July of 26.
So, my question is, if the numbers that were put together are accurate, which I believe they are, I know where they came from, I know how they were put together, it seems like you are saying you won't really know by this town meeting whether you're gonna want to do grass or artificial turf, because what you're describing is a process that assumes artificial turf, whereas you have enough money to do 2 grass fields based on these dollars.
So that's a really good point. So we will not know what we're going to be bringing forward at the spring town meeting in terms of grass or synthetic. The $2 million in the general fund historically has been represented for the portion of field reconstruction that is not covered under CPC. So in terms of a policy decision, and the assistant town manager of finance and the select board want to take some time to review if they would like to start funding natural grass fields out of the tax levy. So that $2 million will not be used towards this field unless it is synthetic, as of right now.
I'm still confused.
So there's not a policy, but there's a past practice around general fund dollars not supporting recreation capital because we qualify under CPC.
Okay.
So that's what the 2 million represents.
Melissa, Christian wanted to.
Yes.
Oh, I'm sorry.
It is a little confusing. It's sort of recent developments resulting from the funding challenges sort of facing the town currently with a lot of projects. So I think essentially the 2 million would be earmarked for usage for turf if that's what the project ended up requiring. So they wouldn't be spent under the current policy, they wouldn't be spent if the project ended up being grass fields, they would be returned to the town. So it's essentially a placeholder based on funding that's available this year towards a future project and the total project cost in a future year, depending on what that ended up being. A lot of this happened, we pushed hard to try to link the timing of a potential new field at Harrington with the loss of the center fields. And so that accelerated what would be normally a multiple year process of design funds, a whole year seeking construction funds. We tried to accelerate that to meet the timing of the high school so that we could get a field rapidly on. It's now, the latest thinking is that we won't lose any of the fields, the varsity baseball, softball, the field that's in the middle of those at center, which reduces a little bit of that stress. And coupled with the funding challenges, we can't meet that very aggressive timeline. And so this is gonna result in essentially a year delay, but gets us closer to the typical design funds, completed design, brought forward for construction funding. And so this spring would be kind of design funds, placeholder funds, because they're available now. A full year later, the finished design that's proposed to town meeting for construction funding, which would, so it is complicated. I apologize that it's not as straightforward as usual.
Okay, now I understand, but my understanding when we voted in the fall for these $100,000 design funds was that this process was going to happen, a decision was going to be being made between the fall and the spring, and now it's out. What is the timing you predict on the making a decision? And the financial decision seemed to really lean very heavily on going grass. So I don't, it seems like we could get a grass field faster, it'll be healthier, sustainable, cost effective, all of the things that people want in town. So I'm a little confused, but just the timing of when you're going to come up with a recommendation and doing some other outreach to the town, and I'll stop.
Yeah, and so at special town meeting, that was entirely the plan. Design funds, accelerated timeline, proposed project at this annual town meeting for construction funding. That's now off the table, so there's a delay. So the thought now is design funds, we are still pushing forward with having community meetings, working on that. But that's delayed by a year. So the current plan is annual town meeting 2026, a final project design would be brought to town meeting for construction funding.
And if I could just add to that, because we start our budget cycle in September, we will, between now and September, have a much stronger ability to speak towards what the community outreach and engagement gave to us in terms of what they would like. We did that very similar, if you recall, with the Center Rec Complex, when we converted the grass field to synthetic and we brought both projects forward and it had the pricing. So it'll be a very similar process. I do want to say that this will be the first time in many years that a new facility is coming online for the town. So no matter what type of surface we get, we are winning. Because we will have 2 new fields and we are gaining hours. And as you all know, we're landlocked and there's all lots of reasons why we can and can't build in certain areas because we're, so lucky to have so much conservation and wetlands as well. And the trees and everything, all the things that are what makes Lexington so special. But I will say, no matter what happens, this is a win. To have a landlocked community bring on a brand new athletic facility in a town that has such a demand for fields and open space, I think that we should all feel good about that, no matter what. So hopefully everyone will support the demolition of the central office building so that this project actually can come to fruition in whatever shape and size it is.
I have a question.
I think I turned that off on you. You might have to turn it back.
How do I turn it on? Oh, it's here. Hi, thank you so much for coming and speaking with us this morning. I'm Jillian Tung. I'm a member of the Board of Health, but I'm here as an individual. I have a couple of questions for you. One, do you have any more information about the disposition of the field that has been removed? Where it's gone, how is it being disposed of, is it being reused? And if so, specifically what communities those fields have gone to? And my next question is, when you conduct your upcoming community engagement meetings, what steps are you going to take to make sure that the stakeholders get a balanced view and get all of the data that are available? At these meetings, is the entire working group going to be present? Because it is vital, as Cindy pointed out, that that community members get the full picture and understand all of the the data that is available to them. Thank you.
So your first question, yes, all of the materials from Lincoln One were removed and repurposed and they were brought to Norwalk, Connecticut. We don't have the specifics on every location in Norwalk, but the typical uses and what they said were they were going to indoor athletic facilities, golf courses. Some of it's going to be repurposed, like the crumb rubber will be used in other projects, things like that. But none of the materials that were removed from Lincoln were brought to a landfill. They were all repurposed. In terms of the outreach, we do, the public meetings we'll have regularly at the rec committee will be updates about the community engagement process and then design options for them to review along the way of the process. In terms of the community outreach, we'll have community meetings that are open to all. We haven't had the working group as a presentation as at any of our community engagement, but they're all welcome and some have been able to come because they're all on different boards and committees. And with recreation, we have liaisons. Many times they're at these duplicate meetings, but that's a great idea, something that we can bring back to the group.
Thank you. I see that it's approaching 10:30, which is when we like to wrap this up. So I want to thank the 4 people who came today, took time out of their lives and their schedules. And I feel like I know a lot more now today, especially about, very informative about the funding going forward, because I had heard that there were some things had happened. Now I know it better, so thank you. I want to just close this here. We do not yet have a topic for our March 7th first Friday, but we do have a topic for April, and I forget which date it is. It might be April 4th. We're going to be discussing accessory dwelling units, ADUs, because there's new legislation and regulations about those, and that is of great interest to people who want to put, what do they call them, granny flats? Places where they can have a smaller dwelling thing on their property for a family member or friend or whatever to live in, and given what we're doing with housing, it's an important topic. Our next league event is Local Candidates Night. That'll be next Thursday, February 13th at Clark Middle School. All candidates for town meeting members will meet at 7:15 to 8:15, 7:15 to 7:45 in individual classrooms. And then in the auditorium, candidates for townwide contests, planning board, school committee, and select board will meet in the auditorium starting at 8 o'clock. So 8 o'clock for the planning board, 8:30 for the school committee, 9 o'clock for the select board. And I wish we could get out a little bit earlier, but given that we have, and we're so glad we have all these races, by the way, everyone. It's really made for a very healthy discussion this session, and I applaud, I see we have some candidates sitting here today. I applaud people who've taken out the time to run either for town meeting or for townwide candidates. And with that, I say, Mark?
Could you just say the date again for the candidates night?
February.
Thursday.
February 13th. Right, so next Thursday, so coming up. And I know there are other forums, if anybody knows when they are, Tom or Joe, there's the Cal, that's the Saturday,
Cal is Sunday.
Sunday?
Yeah, Cal is remote on Sunday. Miriam Hill Association is Saturday at 3 p.m. Cal is Sunday at 2 p.m. There seems to be one every day, but
That covers the next week.
Next week, right. Sandy?
When did you say the town meeting candidates, what's their time frame?
7:15 to 7:45, half an hour.
Is that enough time? I don't think it is.
It's not enough, but you want to stay till 11 or 12 o'clock? If we get enough people who want to stay till 11 or 12 o'clock, that's the problem.
Start at 7.
People don't get there. We've tried.
If there's a reason, they will.
The doors open at 6:30, And people will start coming in, but it is hard when people are coming from work, for example, to get there. You know, yeah, we're doing the best we can. I mean, the other option would be to split our program into 2 different nights. Winchester is doing 2 different nights for candidates night for some reason. They have 2 races. They're doing one on one night, one the next night. But then that means all the people working on this are putting in a lot of extra time.
I don't think there are that many nights left. I mean, February is heavily scheduled, so.
Well, now if you get in early enough, by the way, I get the space at Clark in September is when I line that up.
Yeah.
Because otherwise you don't get it. But thank you for offering that, Sandy. I know, it's not enough time.
Every year I say the same thing.
That's right, and every year you keep getting reelected, right? Every 3 years. I think Sandy might be one of the longest serving members in town meeting.
Yes.
Some people just don't know better.
48 years, maybe?
48 years.
Oh, wow.
Were you on the recreation committee?
Yes.
Oh, yeah,
Yeah,
forever.
Among others, yes.
and she was president of the league.
What a history. And I went to Lexington High School.
Oh, okay.
Which is the same building that we're now trying.
Were you in that?
We opened it, our class.
Well, thank you all for coming. We'll see you, hopefully we'll see you in March, but definitely in April, okay?